Should I get going with it?
What's that?
Now saying, should I get going with the error issue? Oh,
Yeah, go for it.
okay, cool. Um, so as I explained yesterday on the KDI channel, the problem is that when you've got a list and it's empty, the emptiness or the emptiness of the list is expressed as an offset. But that offset only lives on the list. It doesn't get propagated down to the list's children. So when the list child is a primitive, it's fine, because when we get to the primitive calculating its definition, we'll be able to pick up that, okay, well, if for example your maximum definition is 2, as I explained with the list, you've got if a list is nullable, you've got actually two levels that are two valid definition levels, where 0 says that the list is null, 1 says that the list is empty, and 2 says that the list has a slot or multiple slots. So when doing that with a primitive, if you've got a list that has primitives, it's not an issue because um, after we calculate the definition of the list, we immediately calculate that of the primitive, and then that's not an issue. But where you've got a nested, when we've got another nested type inside the list, that's where it becomes a problem, because you effectively pick up that you've got a 0 offset. So you set one value to be 0, like an empty slot to be 0. But then when you come and calculate, let's say, the struct inside a list, you totally, well, the current way that we're doing it, then disregards that list slot, and then you end up with nothing. I don't know if I'm making sense, but
Yeah,
I expressed a really good example.
I get the general idea. Um,
Yeah.
so basically, it's specifically a problem for lists that have structs as an element type.
Yeah.
What I don't understand though is how severe of a problem is this to resolve? Is it, um, yeah, like, is this going to be a while?
I don't think so. Because I've started working on a solution. Obviously, I started with a test case that fails. So instead of writing a whole like error batch to parquet, I've just reduced it down to the level calculations. I'm probably about 60% there with the solution because I've got it working partially. So when you calculate the list, when you go from the list to the struct, it's working correctly. Now I'm left with going from the struct to whatever the primitive value might be, or even struct to another list, and making sure that that's accurate. So it's just been a matter of not having enough bandwidth. I could have probably finished it over the weekend, but I intend on trying to get that done like during this week.
Okay, excellent. That's good news. In the meantime, so we finally realized, we're kind of working on some bleeding edge stuff here, and we should expect occasional bugs like this to show up.
Yeah.
So we started implementing a dead letter queue in Kafka and in Kafka Delta Ingest. I mean, and the approach we're taking, basically, as I think we kind of we buffer JSON messages in memory on certain intervals. We write those to arrow record batches, and
Yeah.
ultimately to a buffered Parquet file in memory. And so the approach we're taking is we don't want to, test the validity of so the bug only surfaces for us in very rare occasions when we get a null value for one of these fields. And so the approach we're taking is don't validate the message up front, but when we go to write the record batch to Parquet, if that write fails, we are backing up and basically writing each we're creating a test parquet buffer at that point where we write each message in the batch, and we write it to a separate parquet file buffer for each record, and then that way we can sift through the good records and the bad records. And once we have the good ones, we then create a new record batch out of that and write it to parquet. I will, given the way we're using Arrow and Parquet to do this, I'd like to send you a link to some code in the PR so that you can, just let us know if it's, if this seems like a reasonable approach to you, or if. So I'll grab that real quick.
Okay.
Okay, so the whole PR. I'm going to link it in this chat. So that's the whole PR. I'm going to find the quarantine routine because I think that's the part where I'd like to get your. Actually, there's two areas where I'd like to get your special attention.
Okay, cool.
All right, so one is. Actually, it's going to be. Here's where we do the quarantine. And the other part I'd like to get your eyes on is where we invoke the quarantine. And let's see. And this one is interesting because, let's see here. This last one is interesting because what I'm doing is to protect the clean buffer. I'm storing off the existing Parquet bytes first. I'm cloning them. And then if an error happens, then I'm replacing the existing Parquet buffer with the copied bytes and a new fresh cursor reinitialized to the good bytes that we left off with before we found the bad records. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yes.
So you don't have to review this right this second, but if you get some time today to take a peek at it and just let me know if you see anything too egregious.
Okay, cool. I'll do so.
And aside from that, that is all I needed to talk about with you. Misha had another issue that popped up for him, but it was related to Spark, not Arrow, and it was related to Vacuum, which Florian implemented in Delta RS. And so we were thinking he might have some experience in case Misha still had any existing questions. But I think where Misha landed this morning, he actually might not need that assistance anyway. So I think we're good here for this call.
Okay. Cool. I'll go through this, and then we can just continue this in the channel, and then I'll also give you an update on how far I am with fixing the bug.
Cool. Sure to appreciate your help, sir.
Cool. No worries. And then have you come across any issues with the map support so far?
No, map support has actually been working pretty great.
Okay, cool. No, that's great to hear, because I was just a bit worried that maybe I would have introduced some issues or something.
Yeah. When we first started deploying it, we ran into a couple of bugs, but it turned out they were on our side.
Oh yes, I remember that.
Yeah. So we got all those resolved, and it's working like a champ.
Cool, awesome. And then I'm assuming, actually, we might have we might have a similar use case in the near future where we need to use Kafka Delta ingest.
Okay.
The one of the teams at work, they I think Azure has finally enabled, or still in preview, but they finally enabled change data capture on Azure SQL instead of just the normal Microsoft SQL server. So I think our current ETL batches are hourly, so we're looking at potentially moving to real time. So it'll be great to introduce the team to Kafka Delta ingest because they just want to run like a big Spark cluster that does that work. It feels a bit like overkill.
Gotcha. Yeah. So one thing to keep in mind there for Azure, right at the moment, Kafka Delta ingest that only has S3 support.
Yes.
So yeah, so we'll need to get some Azure bits in there before we can before you'll be able to leverage it, most likely.
Okay. Hopefully I'll be able to look at it at some point.
Okay. Cool. Well, I appreciate the call, sir. And I'm going to stop the live stream and I'll talk to you next time.